In this video, we're taking a calm journey into the life of one of music's most transformative figures, Elvis Aaron Presley. From a small two-room house in Tupelo, Mississippi, to stages that held thousands, Elvis didn't just sing songs. He shifted the heartbeat of a generation. Rock and roll, rhythm and blues, gospel, country, all blended in a voice that somehow felt both brand new and deeply familiar. But tonight, we're not rushing through hit records or screaming fans. We're slowing down. We're walking through the quiet moments, the childhood streets, the first time his fingers found a guitar string, the hum of a radio in a tiny kitchen, the smell of his mother's cooking, the feeling of red dirt under worn shoes. So settle in, take a deep breath, and let the story wash over you like a southern breeze on a summer evening. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Let's begin. The year is 1935, January 8th to be exact. It's early morning in Tupelo, Mississippi, and the world outside is cold. Not the biting cold of the north, but the damp, bone-deep chill that sneaks through wooden walls and thin blankets. Inside a small house on Old Saltillo Road, a woman named Gladys Presley is in labor. The house is simple. 2 rooms, built by her husband Vernon and his father and brother, using lumber bought on credit and nails salvaged wherever they could find them. The walls are plain wood. The windows are small. There's no insulation to speak of. In winter, you can see your breath in the morning. In summer, the heat presses down like a hand. But right now, in this moment, none of that matters. Because Gladys is bringing a child into the world. She's 22 years old. Vernon is only 18. They've been married a little over a year. Young, barely more than kids themselves, but filled with hope the way young people often are. They believe, despite everything, that things will get better. That this baby will have a better life than they've had. The labor is long. Hours pass. The midwife, a local woman who's delivered dozens of babies in these parts, works quietly and efficiently. There's no hospital, no doctors in white coats, just experience, intuition, and prayer. Finally, in the early hours, a baby boy arrives. He's small but healthy. He cries, a thin wail that fills the little room. They name him Jesse Garon Presley. But something is wrong. The midwife knows immediately. There should be another child. Gladys is carrying twins. 35 minutes later, the second baby is born. But he doesn't cry. He doesn't move. Jesse Garon is stillborn. The room, which had been filled with the fragile joy of new life, goes quiet. Gladys is exhausted, heartbroken, and still in pain. Vernon stands helpless, holding the tiny body of the son who never drew breath. The midwife wraps the second baby carefully, her face somber. The living twin, born second, is named Elvis Aaron Presley. From the very beginning, Elvis would carry the shadow of his brother with him. Gladys would speak of Jesse Garon often. She would tell Elvis when he was old enough to understand that he had been born with a twin. That somewhere, in a way she couldn't quite explain, Jesse was still with him. Watching over him. A guardian, a companion, a ghost. Some people thought it made her overly protective. Others understood. She had lost one son. She would do everything in her power not to lose the other. The little house on Old Saltillo Road wasn't much, but it was theirs, for a while anyway. Vernon worked odd jobs, driving trucks, sharecropping, whatever he could find. Money was always tight. The Depression was still lingering in the rural South, though people didn't talk about it much. It was just life. You did what you had to do. Gladys stayed home with Elvis. She cooked, cleaned, mended clothes until they couldn't be mended anymore. She sang to him. Old hymns mostly, songs she'd learned in church. Her voice wasn't trained, but it was warm and true. Elvis would lie in his crib, or later sit on the floor and listen. He didn't have toys, not many anyway. But he had his mother's voice. The neighborhood was poor but not unfriendly. People looked after each other. If someone had extra beans from the garden, they shared. If a child needed watching, someone watched. It wasn't charity exactly. It was survival. You helped because you knew one day you'd need help too. Elvis was a quiet child, not shy exactly, but observant. He watched people, listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was soft, almost a mumble. He had a way of lowering his head when adults talked to him, looking up through his lashes. Polite, almost too polite. Gladys called him her little man. She doted on him in a way that some neighbors found excessive. She didn't let him out of her sight if she could help it. If he scraped his knee, she fussed over it for days. If he caught a cold, she kept him bundled indoors until every sniffle was gone. Vernon was more distant. Not unkind, but preoccupied. He was trying to provide, and it wasn't going well. Jobs were hard to come by. Money even harder. He'd leave early in the morning, come back late, exhausted and frustrated. He loved his son, no question, but he didn't have the time or energy to show it the way Gladys did. When Elvis was around 2 years old, the family had to leave the little house. They couldn't keep up with the payments. It wasn't a foreclosure exactly, more like an understanding. They packed what little they had and moved in with relatives for a while. Then to another rental. Then another. This became the pattern of Elvis's early childhood. Moving. Always moving. Never quite settled. Different houses, but always the same kind of house. Small. Drafty. Worn. They lived in East Tupelo, the poorer side of town. Across the railroad tracks, as the saying went. Literally. East Tupelo was where the black families lived mostly, and poor white families like the Presleys. It wasn't officially segregated. Tupelo was too small for that kind of formal division, but the lines were there nonetheless. Invisible but understood. Elvis grew up hearing black music, gospel from the church across the way, blues drifting from open windows on Saturday nights, work songs from men laboring in the fields. It soaked into him without him even realizing it. The rhythms, the cadences, the way a voice could bend a note until it meant something more than words. On Sundays, the Presleys went to the Assembly of God Church. It was a Pentecostal congregation, which meant the services were loud, emotional, unrestrained. People shouted, sang, clapped. Sometimes they spoke in tongues, their voices rising and falling in a language no one quite understood, but everyone felt. Elvis loved it. He'd sit in the pew, sandwiched between Gladys and Vernon, and watch the choir. The way they swayed. The way their voices built on each other, layer on layer, until the whole room seemed to vibrate. The preacher would pace and shout, his voice hoarse by the end, and people would cry and laugh and shout, "Amen," and Elvis would absorb it all. Music in that church wasn't about performance. It was about feeling, about letting something inside you out, about connecting to something bigger. And even as a child, Elvis understood that. By the time he was 5, he was singing along, quietly at first, then louder. Gladys would smile and squeeze his hand. Other congregants would nod approvingly. "That boy's got a voice," someone would say, and Gladys would beam with pride. School started when Elvis was 6. He attended East Tupelo Consolidated School, a small building that housed all the grades in a few rooms. He was an average student, not brilliant, not struggling, just there. He didn't cause trouble, didn't stand out. Teachers remembered him, if they remembered him at all, as polite and quiet. He had friends, but not many. He wasn't good at sports, which mattered in a place like Tupelo. Boys were expected to play baseball, to wrestle, to prove themselves physically. Elvis wasn't interested. He'd rather sit under a tree and listen to someone play guitar, or hum to himself, or just watch the clouds. Some kids teased him for it, called him a mama's boy, and they weren't entirely wrong. He was close to Gladys in a way that seemed unusual. He'd hold her hand walking to school long past the age when other boys would be embarrassed to do so. If she was sick, he'd sit by her bed and refuse to leave. If she was happy, he was happy. If she was sad, he'd do anything to make her smile. Vernon, meanwhile, was struggling. He took a job at a dairy, then a job delivering groceries. Nothing lasted. Nothing paid enough. In 1938, when Elvis was 3, Vernon got into trouble. He and 2 other men altered a check, changed the amount from a few dollars to a few hundred. It was desperate, stupid, and illegal. Vernon was caught. He was tried. And he was sentenced to 3 years at Parchman Farm, the Mississippi State Penitentiary. For Gladys, it was devastating. She was alone now with a small child and no income. They lost the house again. She moved in with relatives, then took in sewing, cleaned houses, did whatever she could. Elvis didn't fully understand what was happening. He knew his father was gone. He knew his mother was sad. He knew they had even less than before. But he was too young to grasp the shame, the fear, the uncertainty. Vernon served 8 months before being released. He came back thinner, quieter, marked by the experience. He never talked about it. The family never talked about it, but it hung over them like a cloud. Money got even tighter. They moved again and again. Elvis wore hand-me-downs, shoes that didn't quite fit. He ate whatever was put in front of him and never complained. He learned early not to ask for things, not because he was told not to, but because he could see the worry in his mother's eyes. But there was music. Always music. Gladys sang while she worked. Vernon played a little guitar, not well, but enough. On warm evenings, neighbors would sit on porches, and someone would pull out an instrument, and everyone would sing. Old hymns, folk songs, country ballads, the kind of music that didn't need a stage or an audience. It just needed people and time. Elvis soaked it in. He didn't perform, not yet, but he listened. He learned the melodies, the words, the way a song could change the mood of a room, make a hard day feel a little softer, make people smile when they had little reason to. When Elvis was around 8, something shifted. He'd always been musical, but now it was becoming something more. He'd sing along to the radio with surprising accuracy. He'd memorize songs after hearing them once or twice. He'd hum constantly, absent-mindedly, like it was as natural as breathing. Gladys noticed. So did Vernon. And so did a teacher at school, a woman named Mrs. Grimes. She taught music, among other things, and she saw something in the quiet boy who sat in the back and mumbled when spoken to but came alive when the class sang. One day Mrs. Grimes asked Elvis to sing for the class. He was terrified. He didn't want to stand up, didn't want everyone looking at him, but she was gentle, encouraging. And finally, he agreed. He stood at the front of the room, small and thin and awkward, and sang Old Shep. It was a sad song about a boy and his dog, the kind of song that could make grown men cry if done right. Elvis did it right. His voice was clear and high and filled with a sincerity that stopped the other kids from fidgeting. They listened, really listened. And when he finished, there was a moment of silence before Mrs. Grimes started clapping. Then the other kids joined in. It was the first time Elvis felt that, the power of holding a room with his voice, the way people looked at him differently after, like he was someone worth noticing. Mrs. Grimes entered him in a singing contest at the Mississippi-Alabama Fair and Dairy Show. It was a big deal for Tupelo. People came from all over the county. There were rides, animals, contests of all kinds, and a talent show. Elvis was 10 years old. He wore overalls because that's what he had. He stood on a chair so he could reach the microphone, and he sang Old Shep again because it was the song he knew best. He didn't win first place. He came in 5th. But he won something, a few dollars and free rides at the fair. More importantly, he'd stood on a stage in front of hundreds of people and sang, and he hadn't fallen apart. Gladys was so proud she cried. She told everyone who would listen. "That's my boy," she'd say. "That's my Elvis." Not long after, for his birthday, or maybe for Christmas, the stories vary, Gladys and Vernon scraped together enough money to buy Elvis a gift. He'd wanted a bicycle, or maybe a rifle, something the other boys had. But those were too expensive, Instead, they bought him a guitar. It wasn't a fancy instrument, just a small, cheap acoustic from the Tupelo hardware store. It cost around $12, which was a fortune for the Presleys. But they bought it anyway. Elvis wasn't sure about it at first. He didn't know how to play. It felt awkward in his hands. The strings hurt his fingers. But Gladys encouraged him. Vernon showed him a few basic chords. And slowly, over weeks and months, Elvis started to figure it out. He didn't take formal lessons, couldn't afford them. Instead, he watched. He'd see a man playing on a street corner and study his hands. He'd hear a song on the radio and try to replicate it. He'd sit for hours fumbling through chords until his fingers bled and his mother made him stop. The guitar became his companion. He carried it everywhere, to school, to church, to friends' houses. He wasn't showing off. He wasn't confident enough for that. But he liked having it near. It was something that was his, something he could control when so much of his life felt out of control. By the time he was 11, Elvis could play well enough to accompany himself. He'd sing and strum at the same time, his voice and the guitar blending into something simple but affecting. He still didn't perform much, mostly just at home for his mother, or at church, where the congregation welcomed any musical contribution. But people were starting to notice. "That Presley boy can sing," they'd say. And Gladys would smile that proud, fierce smile and say, "Yes, yes, he can." Life in Tupelo continued in its difficult, uncertain way. Money was always a problem. Vernon moved from job to job. Gladys took in more sewing, more cleaning. They moved houses again. Elvis changed schools. But through it all, there was music, the guitar, the singing, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was something special waiting. Elvis didn't think about fame, didn't dream of stages or records or screaming fans. He just knew that when he sang, the world made a little more sense. The worry faded. The hunger felt less sharp. And for a few minutes, everything was okay. In 1946, when Elvis was 11, the family's situation became especially dire. Vernon couldn't find steady work. They were behind on rent again. Eviction was looming. They'd exhausted the goodwill of relatives. Tupelo, as much as it was home, had nothing left to offer them. Vernon heard there was work in Memphis, Tennessee, a bigger city, more opportunities. It was a risk, moving with no job lined up, no place to live, but staying felt like a slower form of the same risk. So they packed. Again. Everything they owned fit into a truck borrowed from a friend. Clothes, a few dishes, Vernon's tools, Elvis's guitar. On a cool day in late 1948, the Presley family left Tupelo. Elvis sat in the back of the truck, watching the town disappear behind them. The little houses, the church, the school, the streets he'd walked his whole life. He was 13 years old, and he had no idea that he was leaving behind not just a town, but an entire chapter of his life. That ahead of him, in Memphis, everything was about to change. But for now, he just held his guitar and watched the road. Gladys sat up front, silent, her hands folded in her lap. Vernon drove, jaw set, eyes forward. They were heading north, toward Memphis, toward uncertainty, and though none of them could have known it, toward history. The road stretched out before them, long and winding. The truck rattled over every bump. The November air was cool but not cold yet. Fields rolled by, cotton already picked, the stalks dry and brown. Every now and then they'd pass through a small town, but Vernon didn't stop. They couldn't afford to. Elvis watched the landscape change. Tupelo had been small, familiar, every face known. Memphis was a city. Over 100,000 people, factories, traffic, noise. He'd been there once or twice with his parents, brief visits but never to stay. The idea of it was both exciting and terrifying. Gladys was quiet the whole ride. She'd left behind her family, her friends, the graves of her parents. Vernon had made the decision quickly, maybe too quickly, but what choice did they have? Stay and starve, or leave and hope? She chose hope, but that didn't mean it didn't hurt. They arrived in Memphis in the late afternoon. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the streets. The city was loud. Cars everywhere, honking, rushing. People on sidewalks, walking fast, like they all had somewhere important to be. The buildings were taller than anything in Tupelo, brick and stone and glass. Vernon drove them to a neighborhood called Lauderdale Courts. It was a public housing project, brand new, built just a few years earlier. Rows of identical brick buildings, clean and orderly. For poor families, but families who were trying. You had to apply, be approved. The Presleys had applied weeks earlier and been accepted. Their apartment was on the first floor. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a bathroom with running water and a real toilet, not an outhouse. To Gladys, who'd spent years in shacks with leaking roofs and dirt floors, it felt like a palace. Elvis got the smaller bedroom. It was barely big enough for a bed and a dresser, but it was his own space. He set his guitar in the corner and sat on the bed, listening to the sounds of the city through the thin walls. Voices, footsteps, a baby crying somewhere above them, a radio playing faintly. It was strange, different, but not bad. The next few days were spent settling in, unpacking the little they had. Vernon went out looking for work. Gladys cleaned the apartment, even though it was already clean. Elvis wandered the hallways, shy and curious. Lauderdale Courts was full of families like theirs, poor but not destitute, working class, trying to make ends meet. Kids ran up and down the halls, played in the courtyard. Women hung laundry on lines strung between buildings. Men smoked on the stoops, talking quietly. Elvis didn't make friends right away. He was the new kid, the country kid with the strange accent and the quiet voice. Other boys challenged him, tested him. Not violently, just the usual pecking order stuff. "Where you from? What's your dad do? You think you're tough?" Elvis wasn't tough. He didn't pretend to be. He just kept his head down and stayed out of trouble. Eventually, the other kids lost interest and left him alone. School started a few days later. Hume's High School. It was huge compared to the little schoolhouse in Tupelo. Hundreds of students, multiple floors, a cafeteria, a gym. Elvis felt lost. The classes were harder. The teachers moved faster. He struggled to keep up. His grades were mediocre at best. He sat in the back, tried to be invisible. It mostly worked. But there was one place he felt at ease, the music room. Hume's had a music program, small but active. A teacher named Mr. Goff taught basic music theory and led a little choir. Elvis signed up. Mr. Goff noticed him immediately, not because Elvis stood out, he didn't, but because of his voice. It was still high and clear, not yet the deep, resonant instrument it would become, but it had something, a quality, an earnestness. Elvis joined the choir. He didn't sing solos, didn't ask for attention, but he showed up to every practice, stood in the back row, and sang his part perfectly. Outside of school, Memphis was opening up a new world to Elvis. Tupelo had been insular, limited. Memphis was sprawling, diverse. You could hear music everywhere, from car radios, from open windows, from clubs on Beale Street. Beale Street was legendary, the heart of Black Memphis. Blues, jazz, gospel, every kind of music that moved the soul. The clubs didn't open until late, and they didn't let white teenagers in. But Elvis would walk down the street in the afternoons, just to be near it, to hear the music spilling out of doorways, to see the musicians carrying their instruments, to feel the energy. He'd stand outside the record shops and listen to whatever was playing. B.B. King, Muddy Waters, Arthur Crudup, names he'd never heard in Tupelo, sounds that made his spine tingle. He couldn't afford to buy records, but he listened, and he remembered. Vernon found work at a paint factory, then at a furniture company, then driving a truck again. The jobs didn't last, but there were always more. Gladys took a job at a hospital, cleaning and doing laundry. It was hard work, long hours, but it paid. Together, they made just enough to cover rent and food. Elvis wanted to help. He was 14 now, old enough to work. He got a job ushering at a movie theater, Lowe's State Theater on South Main Street. A few nights a week, a couple of dollars a night. He'd show people to their seats, clean up popcorn, watch the movies for free when it was slow. He loved it. The theater was grand, ornate, velvet curtains, a big screen, Hollywood movies that transported you somewhere else, musicals, westerns, dramas. Elvis watched them all. He paid attention to the way actors moved, spoke, held themselves, the way a close-up could make you feel something even without words. Years later, people would say Elvis moved like a movie star, that his stage presence was cinematic. Maybe it started here, in the dim light of Lowe's, watching Marlon Brando and James Dean and trying to understand what made them magnetic. At home, things were stable, or as stable as they'd ever been. Gladys was still fiercely protective. She worried constantly. Where was Elvis? Who was he with? Was he safe? Vernon was distant, working too much, tired all the time. But there was routine. Dinner together most nights, church on Sundays, a different Assembly of God congregation, but similar. Loud, emotional, musical. Elvis still sang in the choir, and he still played guitar. Every night, in his small room, he'd practice. He was getting better. Not technically perfect. He'd never learned to read music, never master theory. But he was developing something more important. Feel. Instinct. The ability to make an instrument speak. He started bringing his guitar to school, not to show off, but because he couldn't bear to leave it at home. He'd carry it between classes, awkward and conspicuous. Some kids laughed. "What are you, a hillbilly?" They weren't entirely wrong. His taste was country, gospel, the music of the South. But he didn't care, or he tried not to. One day during lunch, he was sitting outside strumming quietly. A few kids gathered around. "Play something," one of them said. Elvis hesitated. Then he played a country song, something by Hank Williams. His voice was soft, but true. The kids didn't laugh. A couple of them even clapped. It was a small moment, but it mattered. It was permission, in a way. Permission to be himself. Slowly, Elvis started to come out of his shell. Not a lot. He was never going to be the loud, popular kid. But he wasn't invisible anymore. People knew him as the kid with the guitar. The kid who could sing. He made a few friends, guys from school, from the neighborhood. They'd hang out in the courtyard at Lauderdale Courts, talk about girls and cars and music. Elvis mostly listened. He was still shy, still unsure, but he was learning how to be around people. One of his friends, a boy named Red West, was tough in all the ways Elvis wasn't. Good at sports, quick with his fists. He took a liking to Elvis, saw something in him. They'd stay friends for decades. Elvis also started paying more attention to his appearance. He'd always been clean, polite, but now he wanted to stand out. Not in a loud way, but in a way that said, "I'm not just another poor kid." He'd spend his ushering money on clothes. Not expensive clothes. He couldn't afford that. But clothes that were different. Bright colors, pink, black, unusual combinations. He'd slick his hair back with pomade, shape it into a style that was somewhere between country and cool. People noticed. Some kids made fun of him. Others thought it was interesting. Gladys didn't love it. "You look like a hoodlum," she'd say. But she said it with a smile. She was proud of him for having the confidence to be different. 10th grade. 11th grade. Elvis was moving through high school without distinguishing himself academically. His grades were average. He didn't play sports, didn't join clubs, but he was known. The quiet kid with the guitar. The kid who dressed a little strange. The kid who could sing. In his junior year, he got up the nerve to perform at a school talent show. He was terrified. Stage fright gripped him like a vice, but he stood up there, guitar in hand, and sang. A country ballad. His voice cracked once, but he kept going. When he finished, the applause was genuine, not overwhelming, but real. It was another small moment, another brick in the foundation of something. By his senior year, Elvis had a reputation. Not as a star, he was far from that, but as someone musical, someone different. Girls noticed him now, not a lot, but a few. He was still shy around them, awkward, but he'd learned to talk, to flirt a little. He had a girlfriend briefly, a girl named Billy. It didn't last, but it was something. He also started going to gospel sings at Ellis Auditorium. These were big events, quartets from all over the South performing. Blackwood Brothers, Statesmen, the best gospel singers in the country. Elvis would sit in the audience, mesmerized. The way those men harmonized, the way they moved, the way they made the audience feel something transcendent. He wanted that. Not fame exactly, just the ability to move people the way those singers did. Graduation came in June 1953. Elvis walked across the stage, took his diploma, shook hands with the principal. Gladys cried. Vernon looked proud, or as close to proud as he ever looked. It was an accomplishment. Not many in the Presley family had finished high school, but now what? Elvis was 18. He had no plan, no college, too expensive, and his grades weren't good enough anyway. No clear career path. He needed a job, a real job. He found work at Precision Tool Company, factory work. Boring, repetitive, exhausting. Then at Crown Electric, driving a truck, delivering supplies. It paid a little better. He could help with rent, give his mother money for groceries. But something was missing. He felt it constantly. A restlessness. A sense that there was more. More to music. More to life. He'd pass by a little recording studio on Union Avenue sometimes. Memphis Recording Service, it was called. A modest building, easy to miss, but there was a sign in the window. We record anything, anywhere, anytime. Elvis had heard you could go in and make a record. A personal record. Just you and a song, recorded to an acetate disc. It cost a few dollars. People did it to send to relatives, or just to hear what they sounded like. Elvis had thought about it for months. He had the money, he had songs, but he was terrified. What if he sounded awful? What if they laughed at him? But the thought wouldn't leave him alone. And one Saturday afternoon in the summer of 1953, he finally worked up the courage. He walked into Memphis Recording Service, guitar in hand, heart pounding, and asked if he could make a record. The woman at the desk, Marion Keisker, looked up. She saw a nervous kid with slicked back hair and a cheap guitar. She'd seen 100 kids like him. But there was something in his eyes. Determination. Hunger. What do you want to record? She asked. Just a couple of songs, Elvis said quietly. For my mother. It was a lie. Sort of. He did want to give it to Gladys, but more than that, he wanted to hear himself. Wanted someone, anyone, to hear him and tell him if he had something. Marion led him to the back room. There was a microphone, a small control booth. The owner of the studio, a man named Sam Phillips, wasn't there that day, but Marion could run the equipment. Elvis stood in front of the microphone. His hands were shaking. He strummed a chord, then stopped. Started again. Whenever you're ready, Marion said through the intercom. Elvis closed his eyes. He thought of his mother, the church, the gospel sings, Beale Street, all the music that had filled his life. And he sang. My Happiness. A ballad. Then that's when your heartaches begin. His voice was nervous, unsure at first. But as he sang, something shifted. He forgot about Marion listening, forgot about the microphone. He just sang. When he finished, there was silence. Then Marion's voice. That was good. Really good. Elvis exhaled. She made him a copy of the recording on an acetate disc. He paid his $4. She wrote down his name, his address, just in case Sam wanted to follow up. Elvis took the record home. He played it for Gladys. She listened, tears in her eyes, and said, I knew it. I always knew. But nothing happened. Weeks passed, then months. Elvis kept working at Crown Electric, kept playing guitar at home, kept wondering if that was it. One record, one moment, and then back to ordinary life. But Marion Keisker hadn't forgotten him. She'd made a note. And when Sam Phillips mentioned he was looking for a singer, someone young, someone different, She thought of the nervous kid with the guitar. It was January 1954 when the phone rang at the Presley apartment. Elvis answered. "Is this Elvis Presley?" a man's voice asked. "Yes, sir," Elvis said. "This is Sam Phillips from Memphis Recording Service. Marion tells me you've got a good voice. I'm working on some things. Would you like to come by the studio, see if we can make something?" Elvis's heart stopped, then started again faster. "Yes, sir," he said. "I'd like that very much." And just like that, everything changed. The days between that phone call and the actual studio session felt like years to Elvis. He could barely focus on work, barely sleep. He'd lie in his small bedroom at night, staring at the ceiling, running through every song he knew in his head. What would Sam Phillips want to hear? What if he messed up? What if this was his only chance and he blew it? Gladys noticed. Of course she did. She always noticed. "You're going to do fine, baby," she'd say, smoothing his hair like he was still a little boy. "Just be yourself." But who was himself? Elvis wasn't entirely sure. He loved gospel. He loved country. He loved the blues he'd heard on Beale Street. He loved the crooners on the radio, the smooth voices that made girls swoon. He loved rhythm, energy, the feeling of music that made you want to move. But what did all that add up to? What was he supposed to be? He didn't have an answer, so he just kept practicing, kept playing his guitar until his fingers were sore, kept singing in his room trying to find something, anything, that felt right. The day finally came. A cold afternoon in early 1954. Elvis borrowed Vernon's car and drove to Union Avenue. His hands were sweating on the steering wheel. He parked outside Memphis Recording Service, sat there for a moment, trying to calm his nerves. The building looked the same as it had months earlier, small, unassuming. You'd never know that inside was a man who would help change music forever. Elvis took a deep breath and walked in. Sam Phillips was there this time. He was in his early 30s, a lean man with sharp eyes and an easy manner. He'd started the studio a few years back, recording blues musicians mostly. Black artists who couldn't get recorded anywhere else. B.B. King, Howlin' Wolf, Junior Parker. Sam loved that music, respected it. But he also knew it had limited commercial appeal. White radio stations wouldn't play it. White audiences wouldn't buy it. But what if you could find a white singer who had that feeling? That raw, emotional, authentic sound that black musicians had, but in a package that white America would accept. Sam had been searching for that. He called it finding a white man with the Negro sound and the Negro feel. It was a complicated idea, problematic in ways Sam probably didn't fully understand. But in 1954 Memphis, that's how the world worked. Segregation was everywhere. Music was segregated too. Black music, white music, and very little in between. Elvis walked into the studio, guitar case in hand. Sam greeted him warmly. "You're Elvis. Good to finally meet you. Marion's told me good things." Elvis mumbled something polite. He was so nervous he could barely speak. "What do you sing?" Sam asked. "Everything," Elvis said. Then, realizing how that sounded, he added, I sing all kinds, country, gospel, whatever." "Sing something for me," Sam said. So Elvis did. He sang a few country songs, some gospel, a Dean Martin ballad. He sang for maybe an hour, Sam listening, occasionally asking him to try something different. Elvis's voice was good. Sam could hear that. It was unique. A little rough around the edges, but genuine. But it wasn't quite right. It was too polite, too controlled. Sam wanted something wilder, something that hadn't been tamed yet. "You've got talent," Sam said finally, "but I'm not hearing it yet. The thing that makes you different. Keep working. We'll try again." Elvis left feeling deflated. He'd sung everything he knew, and it wasn't enough. Maybe he didn't have what it took. Maybe he was just another kid with a dream. But Sam hadn't said no. He'd said, "Keep working." So Elvis did. Weeks passed. Elvis kept his job at Crown Electric, kept singing at home, kept wondering if Sam Phillips would ever call again. Then, in late June, the call came. Sam had a song, a ballad. He thought it might suit Elvis. Would he come in and try it? Elvis was there the next day. This time, Sam brought in two other musicians, Scotty Moore, a guitarist, Bill Black, a bass player. Both were older than Elvis, experienced, professional. They were skeptical. Who was this kid? Why were they wasting time on him? But Sam asked them to just try, see what happened. They worked on the ballad. It was fine, decent, but nothing special. They tried other songs, ballads, country standards. It all sounded okay, but just okay. Nothing that made anyone sit up and pay attention. Hours passed. Everyone was getting tired, frustrated. This wasn't working. Maybe this kid just didn't have it. They took a break. Elvis picked up his guitar, loosened up a little. He started strumming, goofing around. He sang "That's All Right," an old blues song by Arthur Crudup. But he didn't sing it the way Crudup did. He sped it up, made it lighter, added a little hiccup to his voice. It was playful, fun, different. Scotty picked up on it, started playing along. Bill slapped his bass. Suddenly they were all grinning, all playing, all locked into something. Sam in the control booth heard it. He rushed out. "What was that? Do that again." They did. And this time Sam recorded it. It wasn't perfect. It was loose, almost sloppy. But it had energy. It had feeling. It had something that made you want to listen, made you want to move. "That's All Right" became Elvis's first real record. Sam pressed it and sent copies to local radio stations. On July 7th, 1954, a DJ named Dewey Phillips, no relation to Sam, played it on his show, Red, Hot, and Blue. It was a late-night show popular with teenagers. Dewey loved the song. He played it once, then again, then again. The phone lines lit up. "Who is this? Where can I get this record?" Elvis was at home, too nervous to listen. Gladys and Vernon listened, though. They heard their son's voice on the radio. Gladys cried. Vernon didn't say much, but his eyes were wet. Dewey called the Presley house. "Get Elvis down here. I want to interview him." Elvis's parents practically shoved him out the door. He drove to the radio station terrified. He'd never been interviewed, never spoken to more than a few people at once. Now he was supposed to talk on the radio? Dewey put him at ease, asked him simple questions. "Where did you go to school? What kind of music do you like?" Elvis answered, his voice soft and polite. At one point, Dewey asked what high school he'd attended. It was a sly way of letting listeners know Elvis was white, because from the sound of that record, you couldn't tell. The interview went well. Dewey played "That's All Right" a few more times. By the end of the night, everyone in Memphis was talking about it. Elvis went home in a daze. Had that really just happened? The next few weeks were a blur. The record started selling, not nationally, just locally. But for a local record, it was doing incredibly well. Sam pressed a B-side, "Blue Moon of Kentucky," a bluegrass standard that Elvis turned into something else entirely. Faster, punchier, different. Radio stations played both sides. Orders came in. Sam couldn't press records fast enough. Elvis quit his job at Crown Electric. He was going to be a singer now, a real singer. Scotty and Bill agreed to be his backing band. They started booking shows, small venues, high school gymnasiums, community centers, anywhere that would have them. The first few shows were rough. Elvis was so nervous he could barely move. He'd stand at the microphone stiff, his legs shaking. But when he sang, something happened. The audience responded. Girls especially. They'd scream, swoon, rush the stage. Elvis didn't understand it at first. He wasn't trying to be provocative. He was just nervous. His leg would shake because he was scared. He'd move his hips because the rhythm made him move. It wasn't calculated. It was instinct. But the effect was undeniable. Girls went crazy, and the more they screamed, the more confident Elvis became. He started playing into it, moving more, engaging with the audience, smiling that crooked smile. By the end of the summer, Elvis, Scotty, and Bill were playing several shows a week. They'd drive all over the South, Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, Texas. They'd sleep in the car, eat gas station sandwiches, live on almost nothing. But it didn't matter. They were making music. People were listening. In October, Elvis played the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. It was the biggest stage in country music, the dream for any country singer. Elvis was thrilled and terrified. The Opry was traditional, formal. The audience expected a certain kind of performance, respectful, restrained. Elvis gave them something else. He sang Blue Moon of Kentucky the way he'd been singing it on the road. Fast, energetic. He moved. He shook. The audience didn't know what to make of it. After the show, the stage manager told him not to come back. "You're not what we're looking for," he said. Elvis was crushed. He'd failed at the Grand Ole Opry, the pinnacle of country music, and they'd rejected him. But others saw it differently. A week later, he played the Louisiana Hayride, a radio show out of Shreveport. It was less prestigious than the Opry, but more open to new sounds. The audience there loved him, screamed for him. The producers signed him to a regular spot. And so, we've reached the end of another history story. I hope this journey through the calm waters of the past has relaxed your mind and prepared you for a peaceful sleep. Thank you for sharing these moments with me as we get lost together in the depths of history. Each video is a story from the dusty pages of the past, and each story is crafted to be a lullaby just for you. If you enjoyed this video and it helped guide you towards sleep, please don't forget to hit that like button to support me. Subscribe to the channel to discover more of history's monotonous yet mesmerizing tales and drift off to sleep each night with a whisper from the past by your side. Make sure to turn on notifications so you'll be instantly alerted when new videos are uploaded. Feel free to share in the comments which historical topics you'd like to hear about. Every suggestion you make could inspire the next video. Now gently close your eyes, take a deep breath, and surrender to the night. I wish you peaceful nights, sweet dreams, and a wonderful sleep in the embrace of history. Until we meet again on our next historical journey. Good night.